The Water Horse, Chapter 9. Posty. Crusoe swallowed the swan with ease and satisfaction. He was not fussy. As Grumble had guessed much earlier, and it made a good square meal, and a welcome addition to his diet of fish and eels. He had lived in the loch-in long enough now to have caused the fish supplies to shrink, and once he had realized that there was prey on top of the water as well as below it, a great many waterfowl, feeding or resting on the surface, went to satisfy his appetite. The water horse took coot, morans, seagulls, even, but especially duck. Those birds that fed by dabbling, like mallard and teal and widgeon, were sticking their necks out. As for diving ducks, such as potchard, a tufted duck, they were even easier meat for Crusoe, and he took several eider down to the bottom. Once even a great northern diver went west, all of which led him one day to bite off more than he could chew. Another year had gone by, and Father had been home on leave twice, marveling each time at Crusoe's growth. He was now nearly 2.5 years old, and Father and Grumble were beginning to get worried. How much longer can he stay here, they asked each other. How long will the fish last? How long before he's so big that concealment in such a small loch is impossible? One day, in the late summer of 1932, something happened that had made them worry even more. It was the afternoon of a calm, warm day, and Crusoe was taking his usual nap. It was his custom to have a good rest between the mornings and the evening's hunting, and as always, he slept underwater, rising for air at intervals. These, since he was so much bigger, could be as long as 15 minutes. Now, as he floated very slowly up, nose tilted, ready to draw an automatic breath, his snout bumped gently on something hard, and he awoke. Sinking back down a little, he looked upward at the dark object that lay on the surface above his head. It was large, almost as large as himself, and was pointed at one end and squared off at the other. It was not moving. What could that be? Thought the water horse. At that moment there was a little splash at some distance from the thing, and Crusoe swam over to investigate. But the length of line with its hook and its silvery spinner meant nothing to him, and he swam back beneath the dark object. He would have liked to stick his head out of water and have a good look at it, but this he knew the giants would not like. They could not complain, surely, if he just had a little bite, or took a little bite out of it. Crusoe swam up, opened his jaws wide, and bit through the bottom of the boat. Mother and children had gone down to the beach, and Grumble was alone in the small house when he heard a knock at the door. He opened it, and there stood Posty, white-faced and dripping wet. "Why, Mr. McNab," said Grumble. Posty, he knew, kept an old, half-rotten dinghy tied up by the loch-in, and in his off-duty hours would sometimes try for a huge old pike that local folk believed to be lurking in its depths. "Did you tumble in now?" he said. "Tumble in?" said Posty. "Man, there's something awful big in that loch-in. I felt a wee bump under the boat just before I cast, and the next minute there was a crunching noise and something tore the bottom out of her. The hole the size of a frying pan there was, and the water pouring in. She sank before I could get her to shore, you know. Boat, rod, and tackle. I've lost it all. I was near drowned." "You were near eaten, too," thought Grumble. He pulled thoughtfully at his mustache. "What a pike that must be, Mr. McNab," he said solemnly. "A monster by the sound of it." "That was no joke," said Posty. He cleared his throat. "Tell me now," he said hesitantly. "You live nearby. Do you think there's anything living in the loch-in?" "Oh, aye," said Grumble. "There's fish aplenty." "I don't mean fish," said Posty. "I mean, have you ever seen—" He dropped his voice to a whisper. "Could it be the kelpie?" "Ah, Mr. McNab," said Grumble, "you're surely not going to tell folk there's a kelpie in the loch-in. I'm not saying that such creatures don't exist. There was one in Lochmoor when I was a boy. But for a man in your position to be saying such a thing, why, it would be most unwise." Unwise, said Posty. Yes, said Grumble. If it got about that someone like you, a responsible public servant entrusted with the delivery of His Majesty's mail for miles around, was talking about seeing sea monsters, why, the powers that be in the post office might begin to doubt your fitness for the job. And there's a great deal of unemployment about these days, Mr. McNabb, so there is. Posty stood and dripped for a moment. So there is, he said. Maybe you'll say nothing about this? Not a word, said Grumble, and then, as if to seal the promise, now you mustn't catch cold, so you'll take a wee dram with me before you go. It could have been very nasty, he said later, when Mother and the children had heard the tale, but I don't think Posty will say anything. Crusoe was good, though, wasn't he? Said Kirsty. Good? Well, he didn't show himself. No, but he smashed up Posty's boat, said Mother. He shivered its timbers, said Angus. Chapter 10. A Harebrained Plan. Christmas 1932 was a good one in the small white house on the cliff top, because for once Father was at home for it. What's more, since his next voyage was to be a short one, he would have leave again, he told them, at the end of March or the beginning of April. And by then the water horse will be 3 years old. Isn't that right? He said. They nodded. And heaven knows how much bigger he's going to grow, said Father. We must move him. We must move him then, this coming spring, or else he'll likely be too big to move at all. But how can we? Asked Kirsty. By road, of course. What in? Well, what would you put a water horse in? A horse trailer, said Angus. Not big enough. A moving van? Said Grumble. Difficult, said Father. Moving vans are quite high off the ground and it would be very hard to load him. You need a crane, like we use at the docks. Anyway, what about the moving men? They'd be bound to see him and the story would be out. No, it seems to me there's only one kind of vehicle suitable for the job. A cattle truck, said Mother. Exactly, you've got it. They're just big enough, they're strong enough to carry about a dozen bulls. They're covered, so he won't be seen on the journey, and they have a good long tail ramp to let down for him to scramble up. And one last thing. There's a wee door at the front end of the body, just behind the cab, so that whoever goes into the truck before Crusoe to lure him in with food can get out without being squashed. Just one thing you've forgotten, said Grumble. What about the driver of this cattle truck? There's no way of keeping things secret from him. There's no need, said Father. He knows already. The driver of the cattle truck will be me. One of his shipmates, Father went on to explain, had a brother who was a cattle hauler in the district and would, he felt sure, rent out one of his trucks. My pal tells me, said Father, that his brother is not the most honest man in Scotland. Now and again, apparently, one of his trucks might pick up a bunch of cattle from an outlying field on a dark night and put them down in a different field 40 or 50 miles away. Rustling, you mean? Said Grumble. Father nodded. Mother looked worried. You mean, she said, that you're planning to let this hauler think you want his truck to go cattle rustling? Father grinned. A nod and a wink and a bit of extra cash in his hand should do the trick, he said. I've a clean driver's license, and though I've never driven a truck, I expect I'll soon get the hang of it. Mother opened her mouth to question such a crazy idea and then shut it again, just as she had been pleased to see Crusoe's departure from the goldfish pond to the loch-in, so now she realized she was glad to think he would be going many miles away, out of their lives forever, perhaps. It was not that she bore the water horse any ill will. It was simply that for nearly 3 years now he had occupied so much of everybody's time, besides demanding, she told herself unfairly, constant supplies of sardines and herring and chocolate chip cookies. Her children, she felt unfairly again, had neglected their homework, and her father had done less in the garden. Now her husband was proposing to remove the creature. Good. Huh, she said, with a look and tone of Grumble. I've never heard of such a harebrained plan. I wash my hands of it, and she marched off to the kitchen to wash the dishes. But where are we going to take Crusoe? Asked Kirsty. It's got to be a really big loch, hasn't it? Asked Angus. You're right, Angus, said Father. Get the map out of the drawer, will ya? It's the one marked West Scotland, Islay to Gairloch. When Angus had gotten it, Father spread it out on the table. Now then, he said, first of all, we could always put him in a sea loch. We could also let him go here in Loch Moidart, and he'd be free to make his way anywhere in the world. No, no, the children cried. We'd never see him again. Then it's one of these three, isn't it? Said Grumble. There's Loch Morar, that's the nearest sizable one to us, and deep, very deep. Maybe the water horse that was said to live in it when I was a boy is still there. Might be company for him. Wait, though, said Father, looking at the map. See here? He could easily get down the River Morar to the sea. That's not good. Well, then, what about Loch Lomond? That's big enough. Too far, said Father. I don't want to have to drive all that way. That only leaves one, then, said Grumble, and he pointed to a long blue stretch of water that ran diagonally up the northeast, 24 miles from end to end, and maybe the deepest of them all. There's all the space he could want there. You're right, said Father. That's where we'll take Crusoe. That's the loch for him. And it's not as long a drive as all that. Say 30 miles to Fort William and another 30 to Fort Augustus. When he's living there, said Kirsty, will we be able to visit him sometimes? Her voice sounded a bit shaky. Of course we will, said Father. It's no distance, really. Make a nice outing in the summer. We'll go and we'll call him, and he'll come for a tickle. But suppose other people catch sight of him. They could, I suppose, said Grumble, now and again, if he's absent-minded and forgetful and shows himself for a moment, or if he gets overexcited hunting fish near the surface, or if he bumps a boat like he did Posties. We must just hope he behaves himself. Even if folks catch a glimpse of him, they're never going to be certain what they're seeing, said Father. They'll think to themselves, oh, maybe it was just a log of wood, or shadows on the water, or salmon leaping, or otters playing, or a dead stag floating among the waves. They'll never be sure. We are the only people who will ever know for certain that in that loch there lives the water horse.